So in 4.1 we talked about the difference in returns compared to competition. The fact that you don't have that convenient Mr. Dark curve anymore, that you have the downward sloping demand and marginal revenue curves. And we looked at why marginal revenue and demand are now downward sloping, as well as why price and marginal revenue are no longer the same thing. So we actually get into the second market structure today, looking at monopolies. And so we'll talk about what actually defines a monopoly, because there's a lot of misconception about what is and is not a monopoly, as well as how they operate. But in a general sense, you have one firm that is big enough to control the entire market. This is typically based on what we call market share, meaning that if you look at the customer base or how much control they have a percentage of control in the market. Typically, it's a unique product, no close substitutes, extremely high barriers to entry. We talked a little bit yesterday about different barriers to entry, whether it be high cost, whether it be ownership of natural resources, whether it be geographical or legal, for whatever reason. It is extremely difficult or impossible for new firms to enter in and compete with this already existing firm. Monopolies, as well as all three of the imperfect competitive firms, are going to be what we call price makers. And so perfect competition were price-taking firms. They had to accept that market price. Price-making firms ultimately get to set their own price. Now, there's limits to what they can do, but they don't have to accept any kind of market price. And then there's some advertising, but if there's no competition, well, if you want the product, you're going to have to get it from that firm. So just different companies, different market share they have. Luxottica is one that most people don't know, but they pretty much any name brand of eyeglasses you can think of, they manufacture. And so they have a huge control over the market. It's just no one really, people know the name brands that they produce or for the designers or whatever, but we don't actually know the actual producer. But Google, and I don't know exactly when these slots put out, I would say Google may have a larger percentage of that depending on what aspect of the market you're talking about. But Google's so expansive now, they've got their hand in so many different markets. Microsoft, obviously, with Windows, and then I think the Nike one's like 90% or something like that.
It's 90.
Is it 90? Okay. And of course, that could be from a few years ago. There's other brands that have entered into the market, but you got to remember Jordan's also part of Nike, so they've got a huge control in that market. We'll talk about other ones that have gotten bigger too, and kind of how to regulate them. But so, if you go ahead and save time, all of these are false. So, not all monopolies make a profit. Monopolies are actually horribly inefficient. We're going to look at that at the end of 4.2. They're not bad for the economy. We're going to talk about natural monopolies, which are actually great for consumers. Monopolies are not illegal. When they do illegal things, they are, because we all think of antitrust and the government had to come in and bust up these big companies. Monopolies are not illegal. We're going to talk about things such as Alabaster Water as a monopoly, Alabama Power as a monopoly. And it's actually good for the consumers to only have one producer in that market. But in a sense, just because one firm controls that market doesn't mean that it's illegal. Now, if they do illegal things or they prevent competition, then yes, they're illegal. But they don't necessarily charge the highest price possible, but they're going to charge a price higher than what they have to because there's no competition. Why not? And then the government never prevents monopolies from forming. Once again, they're not illegal. Actually, they are beneficial in some scenarios, but the government doesn't always promote them either. So, natural monopolies is because it is natural to only have one producer in the market. The reason that Alabaster Water and Alabama Power are monopolies is because it doesn't make sense to have competing firms. Let's say you get mad at Alabaster Water for whatever reason. You decide to go out and start your own competing water company. Well, one, you got to have a water source. Two, you're going to have to run, miles and miles of pipe under the city, all the digging to get those pipes in the ground, get them connected, pay all the workers to know how to do that, all the zoning. Then you're going to have to attract new customers. Well, if you only attract a few new customers, you've got extremely high cost with very little revenue. You're going to have to pass that extremely high cost onto the customers. And then when some people leave Alabaster Water, their costs, well, essentially their revenues are going to go down. They're going to have to start charging higher prices. And so having competing companies actually is bad for the consumer because you're going to end up paying higher prices because of the competition and the higher costs for individual companies. So it is in your benefit that there is only one water company, that there is only one power company. Now, yes, there are alternative methods. I guess you could source your own water, you could source your own power, but there's going to be costs associated with those anyways, and it's not very practical. But natural monopoly is when it is natural just to have that one producer. So it's not illegal, it's actually good for the economy because you're going to get the most efficient product at the lowest cost possible. So this is a great example of why not all monopolies are a bad thing. So from a graphing standpoint, some good news. There's only one graph because the firm is the market. There's only one firm, so the firm is the market. So there's one graph. Compared to side-by-side graphs, we have perfect competition. Cost curves are the same. So marginal costs, average total costs, average variable costs, average fixed costs, all those are the same that we've already worked with. Mainly, we'll still be working with the marginal cost curve, which is the Nike swoosh, and then the ATC, looking at whether the firm earns a profit or takes a loss, and then whether the firm should continue to produce. Because of that, MR equals MC is always the most important first thing you do on any of these graphs. Locate that point, draw that vertical line through your graph, and then you can figure out all the costs. And then shutdown rule still applies, where if MR equals MC is below that point on the ABC, where it intersects. So, to maximize profit, it is always where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Is where the firm is going to maximize the amount of profits, which is the goal. Because remember, it's not to maximize revenue, it's not to minimize costs, it's to maximize profit, the amount of money they get to keep. So, just for fun, are they earning a profit or a loss? Yeah.
Okay.
It is. So, the firm is earning a profit because there's MR equals MC. If you were to draw your vertical line all the way through the graph, we'd figure out what 5 units roughly is. Does it show it? Yeah, it does show it. There we go. So 6 units is going to be our profit maximizing output. And so at that point, we can see MR equals MC is below the AVC or the ATC. So actually, no, I have to take that back. We got to redo this. So profit maximizing output, MR equals MC. Firm is still earning a profit. But monopolies are going to charge where they intersect the demand curve. Reason being, demand curve represents all the consumers in this market. And so this represents all the different prices that they're willing to pay. So at 6 units, consumers are willing to pay this price. And so it makes no sense for monopolies not to charge this price because consumers are willing to pay it, and if there's no competition, they pretty much have to pay it if they want the product. So when you're reading monopoly graphs, MR equals MC, profit maximizing output, that stays the same. But now you're going to set the price where you hit the demand curve. And so once again, you got to draw that vertical line all the way through the graph. Shannon, do you have notes?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So MR equals MC, profit maximizing output, draw your vertical line all the way through the graph. Set the price that they're going to charge at the demand curve. And then if that point is above their cost, then they're making a profit. Because remember, this represents revenue. They're going to sell 6 units for $7 a piece. So they're going to bring in $42. Their cost is $6 per unit. So they have $36 of cost. They have $42 of revenue. That's where they get the $6 of profit. How do you feel about that?
Okay.
Okay? I'll take okay. So, just a little bit, the biggest difference, not the only difference, but the biggest difference is that you just got to remember to go up and find that demand curve. Now, if demand curve is below the ATC, they're going to be taking a loss. So, MR equals MC, always the first thing you find, draw that vertical line all the way through your graph. So now, the price the firm is going to charge is $9. We know they're going to produce 10 units. They're going to charge $9. They're going to bring in $90 of revenue. But their cost is at $10. So they've got $100 of cost. They're only bringing in $90 of revenue. So they're losing $10. Questions there? Okay. So same thing, just more examples. So M R equals MC, draw your vertical line. We know they're going to charge $10 per unit. So they're going to bring in $50 of revenue. Their cost, where they intersect the ATC, is at $5. So they've got $25 of cost, which leaves them with a $25 profit. Now, one thing that they will start adding in is this profit or loss per unit. And so you just divide it by the quantity they're producing. And so if they have a profit, a total profit of $25, and they produce 5 units, well, they're earning $5 per unit. So basically, it's just an average. But when it says profit or loss per unit, you just divide it by the quantity. That's going to give you that per unit. Once again, more examples. And this is if marginal cost was equal to the average total cost. And so they would be the same curve. But once again, you read it the exact same. So MR equals MC. Go up to the demand curve. That tells you the price they're going to charge, $9. So you get $54 of revenue, $36 of cost. Find the difference, $18 of profit divided by 6. That gives you a profit of $3 for each one of those 6 units that they produce. Alright, so looking at efficiency. Remember, we've got 2 types of efficiency. We got productive efficiency, which is producing at the minimum cost. And then we have allocative efficiency, which is producing at a point of equilibrium where supply and demand intersect. Remember, marginal cost curve, the Nike swoosh, that is your short-run supply curve for the firm. And, of course, now you've got a downward sloping demand curve. So we can pick out where that allocative point is. But monopolies are inefficient. They're going to underproduce and overcharge. Reason being, they can. They have no competition. And so they can charge a higher price, they can produce a lower quantity, and there's nothing you can do about it. So if they were to produce, or if this was our supply and demand for the firm without any kind of inefficiency, we can see consumer surplus, producer surplus. Remember, consumer surplus, the highest price anyone's willing to pay versus the price they actually pay. The lowest price any producer is willing to take versus the price they actually get. We maximize surplus. But we throw our marginal revenue in there, so now we're looking at monopoly with a separated downward sloping marginal revenue and demand curve. So now, MR equals MC. We know that's the profit maximizing output where the firm's always going to produce. No matter what, they're going to produce that profit maximizing output. Go up to demand, that's where they set the price. And so that's what consumers are going to pay is a higher price. Producer, well, the producer is now going to charge a higher price. Once again, because they can, there's no competition. So what's that?
Deadweight loss.
Very good. Deadweight loss. Inefficiency in the market. Now, they could charge this price if they wanted to, but it's a business. So they're going to charge that higher price because they know, based on this demand curve, that's the price consumers are willing to pay at that quantity. So monopolies underproduce and they overcharge based on the lack of competition. So this is saying, are they productively efficient, meaning they would be producing there at the minimum point of the ATC? No, because they're always going to produce where MR equals MC, that profit maximizing output. But as long as you can recognize these other points of efficiency on the graph, that's all they're looking at. And so here's your productively efficient point, where cost is at a minimum. Here, where marginal cost and demand intersect, that's your allocatively efficient point. Because remember, that's essentially a supply curve. Allocative efficiency is where society wants them to produce, based on an intersection of supply and demand. So they are neither allocatively efficient nor productively efficient, but they're still going to earn a profit. Well, they should earn a profit. So does price equal marginal cost? No. Because ultimately they're going to set that price, whatever that demand curve represents. Okay, so this will be the last slide for point 2. So this is Alabaster Water, Alabama Power, the natural monopoly, where we talked about it makes more sense just to have the one firm in the market. Now, the way it actually works, they're still going to produce here because that's the profit maximizing output. But even at this profit maximizing output, their average total costs are getting lower and lower. We'll eventually talk about later on towards the end how the government regulates monopolies, because sometimes the government's going to step in and say, no, we're going to force you to produce at this socially optimal quantity, at that allocatively efficient point right there. Now, if they do, then they're going to have to come in and subsidize it, and we'll look at how all that works. But the good thing about these national monopolies is that even at this profit maximizing output, the costs are going to be getting smaller and smaller. And so you've got lower cost. And essentially, as more people join the market.
I'm sorry for the interruption. Can I please have Xavier Barnes from the Student Services to see Ms. McGee for a second?
You sure can.
Thank you.
And so as more consumers join this market, it's actually going to lower that cost more and more and more, which is better for you. So, questions on monopolies in general?